Hello. We're doing the part 4 now of 6 Hours One Friday. Max Lucado, terrific author. I hope you've been enjoying this devotion as much as I have. And what we're going to do now is go into a wonderful story. It's always a story that I have loved, and I think it's a very fitting story for Good Friday. And the chapter it's from is chapter 13, Lucky 13. The 11th Hour Gift is the title that Max Lucado puts on this chapter. Nicodemus came in the middle of the night. The centurion came in the middle of the day. The leper and the sinful woman appeared in the middle of crowds. Zacchaeus appeared in the middle of a tree. Matthew had a party for him. The educated, powerful, the rejected, the sick, the lonely, the wealthy. Who would have ever assembled such a crew? All they had in common were their empty hope chests, long left vacant by charlatans and profiteers. Though they had nothing to offer, they asked for everything: a new birth, a second chance, a fresh start, a clean conscience. And without exception, their requests were honored. And now one more beggar comes with a request, only minutes from death of them both. He stands before the king. He'll ask for crumbs, and he, like the others, will receive the whole loaf. Skulls Hill, windswept and stony, the thief, gaunt, pale. His situation, pitiful. He's taking the last step down the spiral staircase of failure. One crime after another, one rejection after another. Lower and lower he descended until he reached the bottom, a crossbeam and 3 spikes. He can't hide who he is. His only clothing is the cloak of disgrace. No fancy jargon, no impressive resume, no Sunday school awards, just a history of failure. Earlier, he mocked Jesus. When the crowd first chorused its criticism, he'd sung his part. But now he doesn't mock Jesus, he studies him. He begins to wonder who this man might be. How strange. He doesn't resist the nails, he almost invites them. He hears the jests and the insults and sees the man remain quiet. He sees the fresh blood on Jesus' cheeks, the crown of thorns scraping Jesus' scalp, and he hears the hoarse whisper, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Why do they want him dead? Slowly, the thief's curiosity offsets the pain in his body. He momentarily forgets the nails rubbing against his raw bones of his wrists and the cramps in his calves. He begins to feel a peculiar warmth in his heart. He begins to care. He begins to care about this peaceful martyr. There is no anger in his eyes, only tears. He looks at the huddle of soldiers throwing dice in the dirt, gambling for a ragged robe. He sees the sign above Jesus' head. It's painted with sarcasm: King of the Jews. They mock him as king. If he were crazy, they'd ignore him. If he had no followers, they'd turn him away. If he was nothing to fear, they wouldn't kill him. You only kill a king if he has a kingdom. Isn't that interesting? I've never thought about it that way. So there they are, mocking him as King of the Jews. But why would you kill a king that really didn't have a kingdom? Well said. His cracked lips open to speak. Then all of a sudden, his thoughts are exploded by the accusations of the criminal on the other cross. He too had been studying Jesus, but studying through the blurred eyes of cynicism. "So, you're the Messiah, are you?" Prove it by saving yourself and us too while you're at it. That's a slight paraphrase, but I think a pretty good one. It's an inexplicable dilemma. How two people can hear the same words, see the same Savior, and one see hope and the other see nothing but himself. It was all the first criminal could take. Perhaps the crook who hurled the barb expected the other crook to take a cue and hurl a few of his own, but he didn't. No second verse was sung. Isn't that interesting? But the bitter-tongued criminal did hear words of defense. Don't you fear God? Only minutes before the same lips had cursed Jesus. Now they're defending him. Every head on the hill must have turned to see the one who spoke on the behalf of Christ. Who could have imagined this thief thinking of anyone but himself? He spoke on God's behalf. Where are those we would expect to defend Jesus? A much more spiritual Peter had abandoned him. A much more educated Pilate had washed his hands of him. A much more loyal mob of countrymen had demanded his death. A much more faithful band of disciples had scattered. When it seems that everyone has turned away, a crook, a thief, places himself between Jesus and the accusers and speaks on his behalf. Isn't that an interesting perspective? Don't you even fear God when you are dying? We deserve to die for our evil deeds. But this man hasn't done one thing wrong. Soldiers looked up. The priest ceased chattering. Mary wipes her tears and raises her eyes. No one had even noticed the fellow, but now everyone looks at him. Perhaps even Jesus looks at him. Perhaps he turns to see the one who had spoken when all others remained silent. Perhaps he fights to focus his eyes on the one who offered this final gesture of love he'd received while alive. I wonder, did he smile at this sheep that straggled into the fold? For that, in effect, is exactly what the criminal's doing. He is stumbling to safety just as the gate is closing. Lodged in the thief's statements are the two facts that anyone needs to recognize in order to come to Jesus. Look at the phrase again. We are getting what we deserve. The idea that we're sinners. All of us are. This man has done nothing wrong. Jesus, the perfect sacrifice. We are guilty. He is innocent. We are filthy. He is pure. We are wrong. He's right. He is not on that cross for his sins. He's there for ours. And once the crook understands this, his request only seems natural. As he looks into the eyes of his last hope, he made the same request any Christian has made. Remember me. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. No stained glass homilies, no excuses, just a desperate plea for help. At this point, Jesus, this is what Max Lucado says, very interesting, performs the greatest miracle on the cross. Now, he thinks the forgiveness of the thief is a greater miracle than the earthquake, greater than the tearing of the temple curtain. That's pretty significant, right? Top to bottom. It shows that God certainly was involved in this. Greater than the darkness that suddenly came, greater than the resurrected saints appearing on the streets. He performs the miracle of forgiveness. A sin-soaked criminal is received by a blood-stained Savior. Today you will be with me in paradise. This is a solemn promise. Only seconds before the thief Was a beggar nervously squeezing at his hat at the castle door, wondering if the knight might spare the king, might spare a few crumbs. But suddenly, he's got the whole pantry. That's what grace is all about. So reflect on grace this Good Friday. Reflect on what Jesus really did for us on the cross. Think about those things. God bless you. One more on Saturday. And the last one will be kind of an Easter vigil thing. And it's going to be called The Final Glance. And is the last chapter in this book that we're doing the devotion from. 6 Hours One Friday. Max Lucado. Till then, God bless you. Take care.